Hi, this is Jennifer Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. It is my honor to welcome to our program Dr. Susan Rice. She has had many roles in government, including National Security Advisor, Counselor to the President, Ambassador to the United Nations. Welcome. Welcome, Susan.
Good to be with you, Jen.
It's lovely to have you here, and perhaps the perfect person to try to understand what is happening in Europe, from which you just returned, as I understand. It was an extraordinary Munich Security Conference in which the Vice President of the United States seemed to chide the Germans about not excluding a far, far right party, and in which our new Secretary of State seemed to indicate that all of the positions that Russia has put forth, including not becoming a member of NATO and not returning to its original borders, is just fine with the United States. What was the reaction to all of this in Europe from our allies?
Well, I think, first of all, stunned, and then increasingly angry and bitter. It is an extraordinary scene just to paint this. Europe and NATO has been our, most foundational alliance for decades. It is the bedrock of American security, European security, transatlantic security. The only time Article 5 has ever been invoked in NATO's history was to come to the defense and support of the United States when we were attacked after 9/11 and went into Afghanistan. This is an alliance that has strengthened and underpinned American global leadership for decades, which is precisely why Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping want to do everything they possibly can to weaken our leadership. And in doing so, one of the critical means of doing so is to weaken and erode our alliance structure. And Putin in particular has long set his sights on NATO, destroying it, weakening it, ending the bonds between the United States and Europe and the bonds within Europe. And here comes Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth and J.D. Vance, who have done more in 4 weeks to accomplish Vladimir Putin's long-term objectives than anything that Putin or the Russians have done since the end of the Cold War. It's really quite extraordinary. And so the Europeans are understandably reacting with amazement and anger, because what Hegseth said was not only, will Ukraine not have any hope of restoring the territory that Russia has stolen from it serially since 2014 or NATO membership, but he also cast into grave doubt the United States' continued commitment to the foundational concept of NATO, which is that we are one alliance that come to one another's defense, and question whether Europe can count on the United States being there. And so this is shaking the foundations of our global leadership. And when you look at that in combination with so many other things that this new administration has done, from antagonizing Canada and threatening Greenland, which belongs to Denmark, a NATO ally, going after the European Union and all of our closest trading partners, ripping out the foundations of USAID. You couldn't design a playbook that would be more suitable and in accord with Russian and Putin's interests than what this administration has done over the course of the last 4 weeks. And you have to ask yourself why.
That is the question of the moment. Let's focus a little bit on the European response. President Macron indicated that he was going to gather the non-US allies. Can NATO function and can they protect Ukraine without the United States? That seems almost impossible to imagine.
No, there's no NATO without the United States. What there could be potentially, but over the long term and at great expense and and great detriment to the United States interests, would be an independent European defense cooperation agreement and defense capacity that stood in opposition to the United States. On a bipartisan basis over many years, the United States has encouraged Europe to step up and to invest more in its own defense and in our collective defense, but not through the kind of extortion that Donald Trump is levying, but through the kind of hard work and diplomacy that Barack Obama and Joe Biden did that really got us to where now 23 of the 32 NATO countries are meeting their 2% commitment, and many are prepared to look at doing more, but not because they have been threatened and bullied and left by the wayside by Donald Trump, but because they increasingly recognize the threat that Russia poses, particularly in the wake of what's happened in Ukraine, and the need for them to do more. So Europe can over time play a role, but right now, if you're the Europeans, and the Trump administration has the arrogance to come to them and say, literally, with a questionnaire, what are you going to contribute to the defense of Ukraine in the aftermath of an agreement that you will have no part in cutting and being at the table for? We, the United States, won't participate at all, but you must come, deliver. First of all, if the Europeans have any wisdom, they won't sign up and say, here's my battalion, here's my brigade. They'll say, if you want us to participate, then you, the United States, should participate, and we all must be at the negotiating table alongside Ukraine. We are now at a point where, the Europeans are going in a different direction. And it is a real question as to whether that this breach can ever really fully be repaired. Because the Europeans now can't trust, even though there are people on both sides of the aisle in this country who care deeply about the transatlantic relationship, that 4 years, 8 years, 12 years from now, we won't have Trump 3.0.
The support for NATO has been bipartisan, and there are many people on the Republican side of the aisle. I think about Senator Cotton, Senator Cruz, Senator Graham, who have been very loud about American support, and in fact were somehow critical that President Biden hadn't done enough. I don't know what they would have had him do. Where are they now? Do you expect to hear from them? What about their own reputations and credibility?
And don't forget Senator Rubio. This is a great question, Jen. I want very much to believe that there is still a significant majority, really, within the Republican elected officials here in Washington who understand the importance of NATO, understand the threat that Putin and Xi, who we must view as a unit because they are closely collaborating in many respects, understand the threat that Russia and China pose to the United States. And that for us to effectively counter that threat and secure and advance American interests, we need allies and friends to do so. That we have no closer allies than those within NATO and in our core Asian alliances. And yet they are being very quiet right now in the face of Donald Trump taking a wrecking ball to not just our alliances, but to U.S. national security. There is nothing that Trump is doing that advances and secures our national interest. And so, but whether it's the dismantling of USAID or provoking conflict with Canada, our closest ally and longest peaceful border in the world, and one of our closest trading partners. And, Canada has been with the United States, not just in the great wars of the 20th century, but in Vietnam and in Afghanistan and so many other places. We had J.D. Vance belittling Canada and the importance of our relationship over the weekend. I mean, it's ridiculous threatening Greenland. There is no reason why the United States, which already has military base in Greenland, can't satisfy any needs we might have through cooperative means with our ally rather than threatening to provoke a war within NATO. Where are the Republicans as this insanity persists and intensifies? If they're going to play a role in advancing and defending our national interests when they are under assault, frankly, from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, they better hurry up, because time is really wasting, and we are alienating our closest partners to a potentially irreparable degree by the day.
Yes, where are they? That is the question. You mentioned USAID a couple times. Americans probably have never heard of USAID before the last few weeks, and they still may be foggy about what it does. Explain not just what it does, but why it's important to America's role in the world, our security, our image, our influence, to have something like USAID.
Well, what USAID does is many different, very important things. It provides support to global health so that we can eradicate diseases like HIV/AIDS, like Ebola, like bird flu, like COVID, that not just threaten people abroad, but threaten us here in the United States, because diseases know no borders. And as we learned through the pandemic, if it can start someplace, it'll end up with us. So putting in place the kinds of surveillance, disease surveillance, detection, testing, collaboration, sharing of the genetic sequences of these sorts of diseases. This is stuff that USAID and CDC support around the world. USAID funds efforts to prevent and deter terrorism around the world, including, for example, paying to support the guards who are holding ISIS prisoners in Syria, paying to prevent the root causes of terrorism that have given root to ISIS and Al Qaeda in parts of Africa and Asia from reviving. USAID provides life-saving humanitarian aid, including food aid, to people who are starving around the world. You may say, well, why do we care about people starving around the world? Well, where people are starving, there is violence, there is conflict, there are refugee flows, there is migration, all of which ultimately affects the United States. But I imagine that most people don't know that the food aid that we provide in Africa and Latin America and Asia and elsewhere predominantly comes from American farmers in places like Kansas and all over the heartland. And we pay American farmers from USAID and Food for Peace to produce this food that we then send abroad. So there are thousands and thousands of American jobs in the farm sector, in the health sector, in the NGO sector that are being lost because of the freeze of funds from USAID and the efforts to eviscerate USAID programs globally. You know, one of the proudest legacies of the United States in the world, and in particular in Africa, but globally, is PEPFAR, the program that President George W. Bush established to eradicate AIDS. It saved more than 25 million lives. And it is now completely being dismantled. The people who deliver the antiretrovirals, who are saving babies who are born to pregnant mothers who have HIV, the people who are receiving the treatments that the United States has supported and provided, are being cut off cold turkey. And you might say, well, you know, who cares about people in Africa dying of AIDS? That's not our problem. Well, the hell it's not our problem. First of all, you know, when you cut off that kind of support and the HIV virus then, you know, evolves in hosts, human hosts, we're going to have new forms of HIV that perhaps our existing drugs don't mitigate against. And what happens then? It comes back into the United States. and can affect Americans here. And by the way, nothing has brought us more goodwill for the United States in Africa and elsewhere than our support for PEPFAR. Why do you think Vladimir Putin hates USAID and kicked it out of Russia? And why does Xi Jinping prevent any such programs inside of China? It's because our support for civil society, for democracy organizations, for journalists, for human rights defenders all over the world, which comes from USAID, undermines authoritarianism and empowers the democratic opposition. And so, that is another core function of USAID that benefits the United States, our values, our allies, our partners, and undermines authoritarian regimes like Putin's and Xi's. So you got to ask yourself again, here we are doing something that is manifestly adverse to the U.S. national interest, which is why Democrats and Republicans, including somebody like Marco Rubio, have championed USAID's work for decades. It's never been a partisan issue. It's not to say that, there aren't programs that can be reviewed and maybe some efficiencies that can be achieved. All of that is well and good, but literally cutting off every single dollar, putting a stop work order, firing or putting on administrative leave thousands of workers, American workers, does nothing but harm the United States and help our adversaries.
It is a tragedy. Let me shift gears a little bit, because you are also one of the most senior domestic policy advisors in the Biden administration, and really champion not only non-discrimination efforts, but diversity issues on gender, on race, on various backgrounds. The Trump administration, and it's not clear even what they mean by it, has declared war on DEI. Now, they seem to also be going after the most basic protections against non-discrimination, including President Johnson's executive order, now 60 years old, that allowed us to, frankly, integrate the contracting world and make certain that we were allowing opportunities for minorities and women. Describe, if you will, the damage this is doing to the operation of the United States government, and really to the whole efforts since, Eisenhower, since Truman, to make the federal government a place of opportunity and a place of diversity where all Americans could see themselves, and all Americans, frankly, if they wanted to, could serve.
The foundational concept of this country is that we are all created equal. And we all have inalienable rights derived from our Creator. That means that regardless of your gender, your sex, your race, your national origin, whether you are disabled or Native American or many other things, we all should have an equal stake. And it doesn't mean equal outcomes. That doesn't mean that anything is preordained, but that we all value equal, or ought to be valued equally. What Joe Biden's executive orders said was that the U.S. government should take care to ensure that our programs and policies help and serve not just the privileged, but what he called underserved communities. And how did he define underserved communities in those executive orders that I played a part in helping to craft? Underserved communities were not just racial minorities, not just women, not just people with disabilities, as important as all of that is. It was religious minorities. It was veterans explicitly as a group. It was rural Americans explicitly as a group, because rural Americans have long not adequately benefited from federal programs. This was about white people, Black people, brown people, Asian people, Jewish people, Muslims, Christians, veterans of all sorts, gay, lesbian, straight, everybody, making sure that programs and policies that had long missed and excluded or underserved some segments of our society were thoughtfully crafted to enable everybody to benefit. The Trump administration vehemently disagrees with that proposition. They vehemently disagree with the core foundational concept of this country, which is that we all should, that we're all created equal and that we all matter. And what they are trying to do is more than just fire people who worked in offices that might have been labeled diversity, equity, and inclusion. More than just go after the foundational civil rights laws of this country that date back 60 years to the 1960s. It is really, truly to privilege a very narrow segment of our society. And let's be plain about who they want to privilege. If you're a woman, if you are a religious minority, if you are a person of color, if you are a person who is non-cisgender, if you are a veteran, you don't count. You are not the group that is to be privileged. The group that is to be privileged by pressing down and subordinating everybody else are white, straight, male Christians. And that's what this is about. You know, you put all this together, it's that simple. It is putting white, male, Christian, straight supremacy back on top of a hierarchy and subordinating everybody else. And, you know, you might think that if you're, you know, Jewish and male and, you know, well-to-do and everything's been fine, that this doesn't apply to you. Well, you got another thing coming. This is not about anybody but those. And it's a problem. And we need to wake up and recognize that, you know, we don't need to privilege people of color or women or anybody. We just need to have an approach where we all matter, that is inclusive and recognizes the worth of every individual. Not equal outcomes, but the opportunity to have a fair chance. And if that threatens a subset, as it seems to, of Donald Trump's elite oligarchy, then, you know, then that's what we're reckoning with. But he is targeting the vast majority of Americans, because when you put women and people of color and religious minorities and veterans and non-straight people all together, we are far and away the majority of this country, and he is coming for us.
It is so important to be as blunt and as clear as we are. When a plane goes down and he says, this is DEI, I think we should be clear. He is saying, if something goes wrong, let's blame a Black person or a woman or another minority. And that is reprehensible for anyone, let alone the president of the United States. And
it is. But Jen, what he's saying is, and what, you know, they explicitly now are saying out loud, is that you're by definition not qualified or competent if you are not a white, straight Christian man. And at the same time, they put people like Pete Hegseth in charge of the most, you know, important agency in our federal government, who has, you know, none of the requisite experience and, you know, a horrible record of alcoholism and debauchery and abuse of women. And you know, but what matters is he talks well and looks good on Fox News. And so there is not a meritocracy here. I am a firm believer in merit. And I think you should succeed or fail on the basis of your God-given talents. That is what Dr. King was talking about. And that's what we all have believed in. That is the basis for American society. But we are abolishing meritocracy under the guise of abolishing DEI. Well, let's be clear, Jen. You and I, as women, I as a Black woman, I'm perfectly competent. I'm perfectly capable, and so are you. And let us compete on the merits. That's all we ask for. but they don't want to compete on the merits because they're afraid of people like us who might beat them out.
And I think it's very evident that if you wanted a meritocracy, you would not have a cabinet that is so manifestly unfit as this one, and a vice president, and frankly, a president. Susan, I cannot thank you enough. Your candor, your experience. It is such a treat to chat with you and to gain some of that experience. We hope to have you back. And thank you. Thank you for joining us today.
It's great to be with you, Jen. Take care.